Right, can you tell that I've lost the light? So it is day 65, I want to say, and let's get on with it. Right, so today's planting, very briefly, is a jackfruit. So we're putting in, which is Artocarpus heterophyllus, which has the largest edible fruit known to man, or at least to me. And I'm putting in with that 3 Aloe arborescens, 3 Dracaena reflexa, a whole bunch of Euphorbia tithymaloides, and some Kalanchoe fedrinkoi. And the point of all that is to give this tree shelter. And also, as they drop leaves, as they mature, they will be changing the soil, making it more hospitable for a forest tree like a jackfruit. And that is something that sort of ties into something that you might be noticing here, which is I'm planting a lot of forest trees around a lot of what are effectively scrubland trees and woodland trees. Now the woodland trees, for the most part, so trees like the Brachystegias, trees like, well, some of the Marulas, which you haven't actually seen yet, those are mostly saplings I put in previously, and trees like the Bauhinias, those will cope quite well with a forest setting. They won't necessarily be reproducing at their sort of peak in a forest setting, but they will cope. The scrubland trees, so things like the acacias, things like the sickle bushes, and things like one that, again, you haven't seen, but it is actually eventually going to be interacting with this jackfruit, so Piliostigma thaningi, which is the monkey bread tree, looks very similar to a Bauhinia, very different pod and very different sort of life history. It tends to rot once the density gets too high. Those move into grasslands usually, and they do create a fungal community, they create a bacterial and fungal community which they thrive in, but that they also, just by existing, they change the soil, and then in move the woodland trees, and the woodland trees change the soil, and eventually, as the forest trees are starting to move in, that canopy is getting too dense and heavy for plants like the sickle bushes, like the acacias, like the monkey breads, and they will rot, and their bodies will become more soil food, and you will have now perfect environment for a lot of the larger, more moisture-dependent fruit trees to start coming up in. And you just have this sort of gradual shift, and that is the sort of, if you step back and leave it alone, that is what most inland areas that don't have large herds of herbivores, and being quite a long way from any sort of major bodies of water, Lusaka doesn't really have permanent herbivore presences. We have small herbivores in small groups moving around all the time, and if there were less people, there would be significantly more of those. And you have large herds moving through occasionally, but the general trend is always towards forest, unless you sort of push it far enough the other way, in which case this far inland, where the weather is very much dependent on the vegetation, for stability. I mean, we still get big storms that are big enough to come up this far inland, but apart from that, it very much tends towards a dry grassland or scrub, and so I am trying to push it in the direction of forest, and I realise that in doing that I am hastening the demise of some of the scrubland trees, but I think if I'm doing it right, and I hope I am, I should be safeguarding the future of a lot of the woodland trees, and also creating an environment that is more hospitable to a lot of the native forest trees, in a world where, generally speaking, the way we are disturbing and changing the system is making the environment much more hospitable, mostly for those scrubland trees. So yeah, so that's another little bit of disorganized philosophy around trees. I need to organize these thoughts more before I do these recordings. I recognize that. It is something I am going to work on. But thank you very much for watching and putting up with this nonsense. And please tune in again tomorrow if you can bear it.